the areas that we have already deployed smart meters would have been replaced. And what was your other question?
If there were any of the non, see, I have an issue calling them digital meters because, anyway, I think I'm gonna have to resort to calling them digital meters, and I'm gonna put an asterisk next to it every time I say it. So the digital meters that are any of those been replaced with AMI?
Just hold on a second.
Wait for.
So your question again was
if any of the non-AMI digital meters have been replaced with the AMI meters?
Yeah, in all of the deployment areas where we've deployed AMI. The only exception to that would be anybody that was on the hold list did not get an AMI meter, irregardless of what type of meter it was they had.
And so they may currently have a non-AMI digital meter.
Yeah.
And earlier, there were discussions about the number of pulses per day on average or typical. And there were 6 pulses for the hourly data plus 1 daily snapshot. Can any of that daily snapshot data be transmitted at the same time as a interval pulse?
My understanding is no, that's a separate transmit.
And then at some point, there was discussion about a customer's bill being influenced by an AMI. How would a customer's bill be influenced by the type of meter that is installed at their residence?
Yeah, I think that is and that's not uncommon, that utilities, when folks get an unexpectedly high bill, and they've had an AMI meter changed out, they've come to that conclusion that the smart meter overcharges. But I think it's just didn't maybe realize it was hotter this summer than it was last summer, or there were a variety of factors that went into that.
Well, I believe this was in conversation with Mr. Marcus, and he asked something along the lines of, if a customer's bill would change, and I believe your answer was you weren't sure.
You know, a place a customer's bill could change would be if they had an analog meter and that particular meter was recording slow. Okay. And now you bring in an AMI meter, you're within that plus or minus 2% tolerance, which maybe it wasn't before.
Okay. And do you know if any of the customers have indicated that they do not want an AMI meter if they currently have a non-AMI digital meter?
Yeah, so I think there probably are customers out there that have a digital meter now that would desire an analog meter in the future, but they already had a legacy digital meter, and now they maybe want to go back to an analog.
And at one point you mentioned that the cost of replacing, I believe it was an analog with an AMI meter, and I know that number itself is confidential, but you said that is in the record, the analog to AMI, correct?
We supplied via data request, we supplied, I believe, to Mr. Marcus the cost of an AMI meter. I don't know that we ever supplied the cost of a digital non-AMI meter.
Okay. Well, you anticipated my question because it was going to be, do we have any data on or cost analysis for digital the non-AMI digital to an AMI, and then similarly, well, yeah, that would be the only one.
We could supply confidentially the cost of a digital non-AMI meter.
Thank you.
Mr. Bauer, could you please explain to me the distinction or difference between a hub and spoke network and a mesh network?
I'll try. If I don't get it right, Mr. Reed can certainly explain it better than I can. But for the system that we are deploying, the meter communicates with the communication tower. We have about 180 communication towers spread across the state, and those meters talk directly to that tower. Now, we've had some discussion around buddy mode, but those communicate directly with the tower. A mesh network communicates, simplistically, it's like everything is in buddy mode, and the mesh network talks to the next meter, to the next meter, to the next meter, and it's a constant communication network that depends upon the other meters to pass along those pulses, if you will.
And with the buddy mode, how do you spell buddy?
B-U-D-D-Y.
It is just
Like
that
my best
simple.
buddy. Yep.
Okay, so in the buddy mode,
Mhm.
tell me how that differentiates from the mesh network.
Well, I mean, it would be I guess you could think of it as a little bit of a limited mesh network in terms of 1 meter to a second meter. But understand, in a mesh network, it's 1 meter to another meter to another meter to another meter. Think of it as a daisy chain, whereas in the buddy mode, it's 1 meter to another meter to the communication tower.
Is it possible that in buddy mode, it could go to 1 meter, find it can't connect there, go to another meter, connect there? And then how does that differentiate between the mesh network?
I would ask that you save that question for Mr. Reed. He's the census expert on that.
Mr. Bauer, I realized I have another question along the lines of your ERT meters. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have any customers object to the ERT meter being placed on their house, or I suppose companies for that matter?
I don't recall any personally. A lot of times people like the ERT meter because you don't have to worry about leaving the door unlocked or the gate unlocked, or worry about, will the meter reader let the dog out or anything like that. But I don't know, I'm not aware whether we had any complaints on that or not.
Okay. And then in buddy mode, does the information from a meter's buddy get transmitted separately, or would it get transmitted at the same time that meter was transmitting its interval data?
I'm going to defer that to Mr. Reed.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Greiveldinger?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bauer, earlier today you were talking to Mr. Schuling about the privacy policy. Do you recall that line of questions? And one of the questions was, well, actually, let me back up. Do you have a copy of OCA hearing exhibit 110
Yes,
in front of you still? And I'm looking at the attachment there, too. And on page 3 of 4 of attachment A, there is the discussion of energy efficiency programs. Do you see that at the very top?
Is that on page 3 of 5?
3 of 4, attachment A to the response.
Oh, yeah, okay, 3 or 4, okay. Yes, energy efficiency, yes.
Are you generally aware of IPL's energy efficiency programs?
Somewhat.
Are you aware of whether IPL contracts with entities to help implement energy efficiency programs?
My understanding is we do.
Are you aware of IPL selling customer data?
I'm not.
I want to direct your attention further down the page to the section titled Analytics and Advertising Services. Do you see that?
I do.
The second paragraph in that section, could you read that, please?
Sure. These entities may use cookies, web beacons, device identifiers, and other technologies to collect information about your use of the online services and other websites and online services, including your IP address, web browser, pages viewed, time spent on pages, and links clicked. This information may be used by Alliant and others to, among other things, analyze and track data, determine the popularity of certain content, deliver advertising and content targeted to your interests on our online services and other websites and online services, and better understand your online activity.
Do you understand that provision to apply to customer load data?
I do not.
To what do you understand that provision to apply in general?
My understanding is that applies to visiting the website, if you will, and data associated with visiting websites, our website, and particular links that might be clicked on to review.
When you were talking with Mr. Schuling, he also inquired about the transition from digital to analog meters. Do you recall that?
I do.
And during that discussion, he asked you a question regarding first installing digital meters in 2010. Do you recall that?
I do.
Is 2010 the first time IPL had digital meters?
No, as I recall, we've had digital meters. When we implemented time of use program, that required a digital meter, and that was, I don't know, back in the 80s maybe it was. I don't know exactly when it was, but it was probably back in the 80s sometime.
So in 2010, when IPL last installed an analog meter, was IPL also installing digital meters?
Yes.
When Mr. Marcus was talking with you, there was a line of questions regarding the market for analog meters. Do you recall that?
I do.
And you provided a discussion of some of your basis for understanding the analog market, correct?
Yes, I did.
You also testified that IPL sells its used analog meters, correct?
Yes, we do.
Does that provide you additional insights into the market?
Yeah. I mean, you could say it provides some insight in terms of what the value of an analog meter is.
And if you could speak in a non-confidential way, what would you say, what does that inform you about the market?
That selling used analog meters into the marketplace, you receive a pittance for the cost of those. In other words, the people that buy the used analog meters only pay a pittance.
Mr. Marcus also asked you about meter test lot sizes and posed hypotheticals of different groups and how many meters you'd need to have. Do you recall that?
I do.
And in that discussion, there was an estimate of a low-end $250 cost. Do you recall that?
I do.
And that was the meter, or the truck roll cost, correct?
Yes, it was.
Are there other costs associated with meter testing?
Sure. So you have to maintain an inventory of meters because pursuant to statistical testing, you go out, you pull the meter, you bring the meter in, you test it in the test lab. So there's an inventory that goes with that. There's also the expense that is associated with conducting the test itself, the test equipment, and the test that actually determines whether the meter passes or fails.
Mr. Marcus also had an analogy for you regarding a restaurant. Do you recall that?
I do.
And in that analogy, he indicated that the restaurant may be incented to have one meal because it could make more money. Do you recall that?
I do recall that.
Do you find any, you had indicated a fault with that analogy. Could you extrapolate on what faults you see with that analogy?
Yeah, I think Mr. Marcus's question, as you asked, was around how much profit the restaurant could make. We are as a regulated utility. That is determined by the board, so we don't have endless possibilities to make profit like what a restaurant might.
Mr. Marcus asked you also about the testing standards for the analog meters and the WRU docket. Do you recall that?
I do.
And he asked you about best practice testing protocols, correct? Mm-hmm. Are the testing protocols that IPL used accepted testing protocols?
They are. We use the ANSI 12.1 testing protocol, and pursuant to IUB rules, that is considered recommended best practice. That's contained, I believe it's in Section 20.6 of the IUB rules. It's considered best practice to use that ANSI standard.
And for clarity, when you pull a meter for testing, let's say an analog meter, and that meter fails, do you put it back in service?
No, we do not. We dispose of the meter.
I want to move on to the discussion of the number of meter pings.
Okay.
And in particular, I want to reference what was Marcus tab 26 in the supplemental response.
Did you say tab 26?
Pardon me, one moment. Do you have before you the chart with the average number of meter pings in the low and the high?
I do.
Tab 3.
Thank you, Chair.
I have the table in front of me.
Can you explain why you included the minimum number of transmits in the calculus for the average?
Yeah, I think if you're going to look at an average, you need to include everything. If we would do as we suggested and take out the low number as suggested by Mr. Marcus, then I think that skews the data the other way, and you'd have to make some arbitrary decision of what should be on the high end of that. So I think to get a true average, you just include everything.
Do you believe that the numbers for the Iowa meters reflect what IPL expects long-term?
No, those average transmits will come down. I mean, if you look at Wisconsin, we are in the 6 to 7 transmits a day. That's design. In essence, that's it, design, and I'd expect we'd be there in Iowa as well once we get through the tuning process.
You had testified before about a snapshot. Does WPL have a snapshot?
It does not. So any of that data, you'd have to add one additional transmit to reflect that snapshot.
The Wisconsin data shows a 1 week where a meter pinged 8,750 times.
Yes.
Given the length of a ping, how much operational time would that be?
That's about 106 seconds.
And is that per day or per week?
So that would be, in this particular instance, that would be per week.
The 106 seconds, I mean.
Yes, because the transmits were per week.
Are you sure about your math?
So you have point. So which line are you on, please?
On 8750.
Okay, so if we take 8750 times 0.085 seconds per pulse, and that 8750 is per week. So am I allowed to use a calculator on the stand?
Would we stipulate that that is per day and not per week? Is that? Are you willing to accept that?
Mr. Marcus, I need you to speak into the mic so that we can record your comment back.
Yeah. No.
Well,
Okay, he said no. I got that.
so I think it's 106 seconds a day.
And yes, you can use a calculator if you have one.
I do. That 106 is per day. I was mistaken. I
Thank you.
apologize for that.
With the Iowa numbers, there's a count of how many meters pinged more than 3,000 times, and it's generally between 2 and 4, correct?
Yes.
On a percentage basis, how many of the meters that are currently operating in Iowa would that be?
Well, it'd be. I'm gonna have to get my calculator out for that. So that is 0.0000943 thousandths, millionths of 1%. So it's an insignificant number.
And you stated before that when IPL sees those, that it will seek to fix them. Is that correct?
That is.
Were any of these meters triggering alarms that caused safety concerns?
They were not.
Had they been triggering safety alarms, would IPL's reaction been different?
Yes, it would have. We would have responded immediately.
The average number of pings per day in the last week in that column is 11. Do you see that?
Yes.
On a cumulative time, about how much time of ping is that?
That's about a second a day.
I have no more redirect.
Mr. Bauer, I would remind you that we will be having confidential session tomorrow, and you need to stick around for the remainder of the hearing. Colonel Wagner, did you have another? Okay. You may step down. You may call your next witness, who should be Mr. Kronk.
IPO calls Dennis Kronk.
Is it on?
Kronk, please raise your right arm. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is true and accurate?
Yes.
Seated. Mr. Clisto, you may proceed.
Please state your name and spell your last name.
Dennis G. Kronk, C-R-O-N-K.
Mr. Cook. Mr. Marcus?
Yes, Mr. Kronk, on page 3, line 11, you state your qualifications favorably as compared with real estate brokers, correct?
On line 11?
Well, you conclude about the real estate agents there, but your testimony is basically from line 3 to line 14 about the number of classroom hours that you take and the number of classroom hours that the real estate broker agent takes and so forth. Your training.
I'm making it distinguishing between the qualifications I have to value real estate and the qualifications and training that real estate agents have.
But real estate agents do things other than value real estate, correct? And they're the ones who have firsthand knowledge on the ground of what a buyer and a seller are negotiating in connection with a real estate sale, correct?
Real estate agents are primarily salespersons. They're marketers. Appraisers are valuers.
Well, I'm just asking whether or not the real estate broker or the real estate agent is the one in direct communication with a buyer and a seller as compared to you.
I communicate with buyers and sellers on a regular basis, but certainly not as frequently as a real estate agent, yes.
In fact, you come in pretty much after the fact to look at a sale that has been completed and what the selling price was, correct? You look at comparable sales prices when you're evaluating an appraisal of a piece of real estate, correct?
I do evaluate comparable sales when I estimate the value of real estate, yes.
Okay, and that's the principal thing that you do. You look at the number of square feet in a house and the different amenities and bathrooms and all of that, and compare it, those properties that have sold, and you compare it to the house that you're appraising, correct?
That's a fair statement.
Okay. But you don't know how that price was arrived at, what the negotiations were to arrive at the price, the comparable sales prices that you're looking at, correct? You don't know what the seller and the buyer discussed, what they took into account.
Well, as I said, I frequently talk to buyers and sellers and real estate agents. I interview them about negotiations, about how they came to sale prices. So I wouldn't say it's fair to say I don't have any idea.
No, but that's not the principal way that you get your information for an appraisal, correct?
No, it is. I mean, we research public records, we find comparable sales, we interview the buyers and sellers of those properties to get that information.
To get that, you just need to go to the assessor's website. Why do you interview the buyers and sellers?
Well, because frequently the appraised properties that I appraise are scrutinized, and so we like to make sure we have the whole picture. So I frequently interview buyers and sellers and verify the information from the public records.
Well, the properties that you're talking about that are scrutinized, what kind of properties are they? Are they, I'm sorry, can you answer that?
Well, it's not so much the type of property as the reason I appraise. I mean, I don't do a lot of appraisals for underwriting. Most of my appraisal work is related to legal issues, whether it be condemnation or tax appeal or estates, things of that nature.
Okay, well, what about an ordinary sale of a residential piece of real estate? Are you called to do an appraisal on that kind of a property?
Yes, at times.
Well, is that property that you're going to talk to the buyer and seller about?
Every appraiser should be making an effort to verify information with buyers and sellers. It's part of the standards.
What information would you verify? You see on the website what it sold for and what the dimensions of the house were. What would you seek to have verified?
Well, as an example, I once interviewed a seller of a property who transferred. It was a warehouse building, and part of the transfer included a pickup truck that was not part of the recorded sale price, but it was part of the transfer of interest. And so those are the kinds of things when we talk to buyers and sellers, we like to make sure, first of all, were the buyers and sellers related. Sometimes that will have an impact on sale price, and we need to know that. We need to know if there were other considerations. I like to know if I can find out how long a property was on the market. Sometimes that might indicate some distress on the part of the buyer or the seller. I like to ask many different questions to make sure I understand the full picture of what's transpired.
Have you ever asked the question of whether there were negotiations about the RF radiation in the house?
I have not.
Okay. So the particular issue that we're talking about is not something where you've talked to buyers and sellers about?
No, and I think in the vast majority of cases, buyers and sellers are not talking about that.
Okay. Now, I understand that. But you don't know the situation in Fairfield and with Vastu homes and whether buyers and sellers are talking about that, correct?
I haven't appraised a home in Fairfield with regard to, with Vastu design. I've appraised an office building or two. But no, I guess I can't. I can answer that is to say no, I don't specifically know what those conversations are.
Well, if you don't know what the conversations are between a buyer and a seller of a Vastu home, why do you think you have more information, better information, on how a home with a smart meter might influence the price as compared with a broker who is talking to those people all the time?
Well, I seriously doubt that a broker is asking the specific question, how does the existence of an RF meter impact the sale price?
Well, the broker is privy to whether or not the prospective buyer is asking the broker, what's the story with the RF radiation, or is there dirty electricity here, or, should we measure with some device what the, EMF is in the home? You don't know that.
I don't.
Okay.
But I don't think they're asking whether or not that would impact the sale price.
Well, they're asking that whether it would impact this. They're asking that because it's a consideration of whether they'd buy the home, correct?
Well, I'm not testifying to whether or not they will buy a home. I'm testifying to the value of the home.
Well, but maybe there is a price at which they would buy the home. The real estate broker is talking to the prospective buyer or the prospective seller, or both if he's representing both, about how they feel about a smart meter in the house, correct? And okay, is that correct?
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay.
But as I stated in my testimony, I think there are many factors, many characteristics of a property, whether it be a dwelling or otherwise, that maybe aren't ultimately your preference, but doesn't mean they have an impact on sale price or value.
Right. Now, I remember that testimony. You said, for example, that, a buyer may have a checklist. He may prefer a gas stove rather than an electric stove or something like that, correct?
That was related to renters, I believe, but yes.
Yeah, but that's the kind of thing that you're talking about that may not interfere with the sale, but is his checklist of preferences, correct?
Yes.
Do you see a difference between a buyer who is concerned about a serious health issue in his mind as compared with a gas or an electric stove? Don't you see a difference there?
I don't think the market recognizes a difference in value because of it, is what I'm saying.
Well, my question is, you see how that would be different. We're not on this, my question is limited right now to whether or not that would be more of a concern to a buyer than the electric or gas stove. If it's a health issue for him and his family, wouldn't that be something that would more make him determine potentially not to buy that house?
I can't answer that. What their concerns over health, I can't say.
No, I mean, let's suppose you had a concern over health. Wouldn't that trump in buying a house? Maybe there's mold. Maybe there is a radon issue. That's the kind of issue that you would agree is more important to a buyer than the electric or the gas stove, isn't it?
Well, I think that the issue is I can't say whether or not it's more important. I can't speak for buyers and sellers specifically, but I think that the data is not going to prove there's any difference in value. And I think that there's going to be preferences from any buyer about what they're going to buy, and they're going to make a determination what they're willing to pay based on those preferences. And I don't think there's any data to suggest that the value of a property would be any more or less because of the existence of the meters that we're talking about here.
But you understand, you've said it yourself, that the data would not likely be available. There's no data that's available on that, correct?
I don't believe there is adequate data to make that determination, and so it's my opinion that they would not have a significant impact, a measurable impact.
But you're making a determination based on the absence of data and the absence of communication with the buyer and seller of a Vastu home who are interested in a home that adheres to these guidelines, correct? You don't have any information about either.
I don't have specific information. I'm just relying on my past experience with buyers and sellers.
But your past experience doesn't include ever talking to a buyer or seller of a Vastu home, correct?
That's fair.
Okay.
Mr. Marcus?
Thank you. Sorry. Are you aware that in Jefferson County for years, and I haven't done this, I'm not sure about what the data is right now in the last couple of years, but for many years, that if you had a Vastu home and it was being assessed, that the assessor would determine the replacement cost. That's the normal way of doing an assessment, correct? And then?
No.
Well, it's a cost basis. I mean.
Well, primarily it's a sales comparison basis, but a cost basis is secondary.
Yeah. Well, that's the way the statute reads, that you should determine fair market value based on comparable sales, correct?
Yes.
But it's not the way assessors do things. I mean, they may take that into account, but in general, they're looking at the number of square feet and the amenities, and they're doing a cost kind of analysis, correct?
I don't agree with that. They measure, they take a lot of data on sales, all the sales that occur in their county. They look at percentage of sales versus their assessed values, and they use that information when they're estimating assessed values.
Well, I will just tell you what, in Fairfield, for years, they've been doing it largely on a cost basis, but whatever basis they use, at the end of that analysis, they would multiply, if it was a Vastu home, at one point by 1.5. So 150% of the value they would otherwise come up with, they would attribute to a Vastu home And if it wasn't a Vastu home, they would multiply by 0.95%. So there was a great disparity. They were, from an appraisal or assessment standpoint, giving a real premium to Vastu homes. Are you aware of that?
I was not aware of that.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to move the strike to the last set of questions. There's nothing in the record to support what counsel has just claimed as a metric used by assessors in Jefferson County.
Mr. Marcus, do you want to attempt to,
Well, maybe I could ask the question of Mr. Lippman when he takes the stand, if you'd have no objection, and then it would be in the record.
Mr. Callisto?
Mr. Lippman is not an appraiser in Jefferson County. He's an architect, as I understand it. So I don't believe he's qualified to make that statement.
No, you don't have to be an appraiser. You just have to know the basis on which the assessor was making determinations and how they viewed Vastu homes.
My objection stands, Your Honor. This is an important piece to the extent that Mr. Marcus and his clients, he's put in two witnesses on their claim that AMI technology impacts the value of Vastu homes. We have argued, I think credibly, that neither one of them is an appraiser. One is a real estate agent and one owns a handful of residential rental properties. So there was an opportunity to put this evidence in the case through whatever professional witness he claimed. We only put our expert on because they made the claim in their direct testimony. So we only put it on in rebuttal for that purpose. To bring it in now through somebody who's not an appraiser at this stage of the game, I think is doing an end around on the board's standing procedure to get this in through pre-filed testimony.
Just a moment.
And Your Honor, if I may add one other thing. The board has allowed Mr. Marcus to put an additional round of testimony in, and he chose not to put any testimony in on this issue. None of his witnesses addressed this issue in his last round of testimony.
Well, I'm not sure. You mean
So,
that-
Mr. Marcus, just let me take care of this in a minute. Mr. Marcus, how do you know that information on the appraisal values?
I brought a lawsuit against the assessor for using 1.5 as the value rather than using a different number. We all acknowledged that there was a premium on the value of Vastu homes, and I disputed that 1.5 was the right number and that the assessor needed to come up with a different number. And it was well known, there's an opinion on it, written by the district court judge in Fairfield, Iowa. I could produce that opinion if you like.
So, Mr. Marcus, I'm going to overrule the objection, but I'm going to tell you that you need to then ask this witness the questions based upon your expertise related to the appraisal value for property in Fairfield.
ask this witness the questions.
That is correct. So I am overruling him, but you have to go back to the things that you made part of the record on your own statement and have the witness answer whether he knows that information or not.
The statement that I just made on the record?
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware, Mr. Kronk, of a district court case that determined that the 1.5 premium that I was mentioning was incorrect and the premium should be some different number?
I was not aware of the premium. I don't find it particularly relevant. The Vastu homes are compared to other Vastu homes. I don't think this is going to change that.
The comparison in the case had to do with Vastu homes being compared to non-Vastu homes, and the Vastu homes being given a premium. You understand that?
I understand, but
Okay.
I'm saying that if you appraise a Vastu home, you're going to compare it to other Vastu homes that are going to have similar characteristics. If those Vastu homes both either have the AMI technology or don't, it's not going to have an impact on the value of those homes.
Okay, well, that's really the question. How would you know that? You've never talked to a buyer or seller of a Vastu home.
Well, what I've explained in my testimony is that if the options are to either have the meter or to not have the meter, the value is going to be the same.
Okay, well, that's speculation without having talked to a buyer or seller of a Vastu home. Wouldn't you agree to that?
I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. So let me try and clarify. I'm saying if the AMI meters are allowed, and so every Vastu home has an AMI meter, that comparing this Vastu home to that Vastu home is not going to be there's not going to be any difference. And so there's no indication that the value would be different.
Except that the value of both of the Vastu homes, one with a meter, both of them having a meter, may decline because the purchasers aren't tied to Fairfield, for example, correct?
I think that's highly unlikely.
Well, what do you base that on?
Well, people have been coming to Fairfield for many, many years, long before there was a prevalence of Vastu homes available. So I don't think that it's an absolute that folks affiliated with the university or with what I believe one of the other experts referred to as meditators absolutely require Vastu homes.
But you understand that people have been coming to Fairfield for many years and buying Vastu homes when there haven't been smart meters.
Yes, they've been buying non-Vastu homes and Vastu homes for many years.
Okay, but the Vastu homes that they've been buying that have not had smart meters. And now if they come to Fairfield and they want a home, if this AMA project is approved and everybody has to have a smart meter, then they will either have to buy a Vastu home with a smart meter or walk away, correct?
Or buy another home without a smart meter. Yes.
Yeah. And may decide not to move to Fairfield if they want a Vastu home. I mean, you understand that there are Vastu homes in places other than Fairfield, correct?
Of course.
Okay. The other issue is you've seen the supplemental testimony of Mr. Lippman about Access Energy's smart meter, correct?
I've read that, yes.
Okay. So they might decide, even if Alliant decides that everybody has to have a smart meter, that those homes in the Alliant area are less desirable than the Access Energy area, because the Access Energy uses a smart meter without wireless technology, according to the Lippman testimony, correct?
It's a possibility. I don't know where the Access Energy area is.
Well, the Access Energy area is partly in the Vedic City area and partly not in the Vedic City area, but there are many, I think it's in the record, there are many Vastu homes in the Access Energy area. So a buyer could decide, because Alliant has smart meters with wireless and Access Energy doesn't, that the buyer will go to the Access Energy area rather than the Alliant area, correct?
They could decide that for any number of reasons.
They could. But you don't know from talking to the real estate brokers, again, what their principal reasons are for walking away from a home, correct?
That is correct. In Fairfield,
Okay.
I do not know that.
So you have a statement on page 7 of 14 of your testimony. And I'm sorry, that testimony is the market overall rather than the market for Vastu homes. Correct?
That's a general, yeah, not Fairfield specific, that's
But-
just a general.
But in the Vastu homes, in the market, you say you don't believe a buyer or seller of smartphone technology, that's going to be reflected in the market value generally of homes in Iowa or elsewhere.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, it says, I believe the market overall would not recognize a significant difference in a dwelling with metering technology and one without. Line 21, page 7.
That's correct. I don't
Okay.
believe the market would recognize a difference in value.
Okay. But in the Vastu area, in the Fairfield, Vedic City area, you really don't know that that's the case because of Alliant offering a smart meter and Access offering a smart meter without wireless, correct?
Objection,
Well-
asked and answered.
Please restate the question, Mr. Marcus.
Okay. You don't know that a person in the Alliant area, in the Fairfield, Vedic City area, with a Vastu home, whether that person is going to have his market value diminished compared to the person with a home in an access area in Fairfield or Vedic City. You don't know whether there's going to be a difference in market value.
Well, there's no data, so nobody knows.
Yeah.
In my professional opinion, there would not be a difference.
Okay. Do you know of situations where people in Fairfield who are looking to buy a Vastu home have walked away from a purchase because they're concerned that smart meters are coming?
Not specifically, no.
No. So you don't know if that has happened or not?
I do not.
You say on page 9, line 14, that with respect to Ms. Town, she gives no evidence to support her claims regarding the effect of AMI meters on the value of homes in Fairfield. You remember that testimony?
Yeah, I didn't see any evidence in her testimony.
But that is because you don't believe her personal testimony, her personal experience is evidence, correct?
I don't believe she indicated any specific reference to value in her testimony.
Well, not to value, but that buyers consider it very important and they want to walk through the homes and whatever. You saw her say that. Maybe you don't consider that value, but...
I don't disagree with that testimony that she
Okay.
said that. She did not give any evidence to indicate that had an impact on value.
Okay. If you see a home that's on the market for a long time, you do see that as an indication that there may be a problem value-wise, correct?
It could be any number of problems.
But that's
Could be that it's overpriced.
Yeah. But that's one factor, at least, that you consider, how long the market the home has been on the market, correct?
Consider when doing what? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Consider when making a determination of the value of that home.
If a home has sold,
No, it's been on the market for a long time, and it hasn't sold. Is that an indication that there's something wrong with the value of that home? There's something the market doesn't like about that home?
it's not necessarily an indication of that they don't like the home. It's possibly an indication of that, or it's possibly an indication that the sale price is too high, or it could be the location isn't right. It could be any number of things. I'm not sure what you're asking.
Yeah, I was just asking if that's one factor that indicates there may be a problem with the marketing of that home. Isn't that obvious? That
With the marketing of the home?
Well, the marketability, let's say, of that home.
It's possibly that's why it's been on the market. There could be any number of reasons that have nothing to do with the home.
Okay. Yeah. I have no further questions.
Mr. Turner?
I have maybe two questions. I just want to try to understand. There are two things. One, are there other people who can evaluate the value of a house besides someone in your profession?
Depends on for what purpose. I mean, anyone can put a value on a house. It's whether or not they're credible in doing it.
And so, are there other people in sets of people that are credible in putting a value on a house, like perhaps a buyer and a seller?
Well, typically buyers and sellers aren't particularly credible in terms of valuing their own property, in my opinion.
So
They have bias.
So what do you base your analysis on then? Isn't it on what the buyer and seller agree upon?
Comparable sales, yes.
Yeah. I have more questions than I thought, given your answer. Isn't the fundamental principle of the value of the house what the buyer and the seller agree on?
Well, what a buyer and a seller agree on for one house, I would not say is necessarily indication of the value of that house. We see a lot of times when buyers and sellers will agree to prices that are below or above what that house is worth. The last house I bought appraised for $17,000 more than our agreed upon sale price. But that particular seller was eager to sell the house because they'd already found another property they wanted to buy. So
Does that indicate that there are subjective factors in figuring out the value of any particular sale?
certainly, and that's why we like to interview buyers and sellers and make sure we know
And
what
so
the
is it
story
possible that people who look for real estate for specific health reasons might put a subjective value on the presence of a radiating meter in that house and see it as less valuable as a result of that?
Yes, it's possible that an individual would do that, but that does not mean the market value of that property has changed.
Does it make it harder for the seller to sell if there are people who believe that?
I can't answer that question. If that's what everybody thinks, then yes. If that's what a small segment of the buying population thinks, then maybe not.
But even the small segment reduces the value of the house by the amount of the small segment, isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, ask me that again?
I said even a small segment of people who say, I am not going to buy this house because my health beliefs and my idea about architecture tell me that this house is not as valuable with a meter as it would be without a meter. Even if a small number of people believe that, doesn't that lower the value of the house at least by the amount of that small number of people?
I don't believe so, no.
And why? Explain to me why you don't believe that.
Well, if let's say there's a pool of 100 potential buyers of a property, and we're talking about one property, and 3 of those people would not buy that property because of any particular characteristic, health or otherwise, there's still adequate number of potential buyers for the value of that property to be realized.
Well, didn't you indicate that there was a set of people who like to buy these kinds of houses, and they have a set of beliefs about houses, and they are interested in buying houses that advance their health?
I don't believe I testified.
Didn't you
to
say
that.
meditators?
I believe I said meditators have Is my understanding that someone else testified that meditators are interested in this, yes.
So if there were meditators, let's just say meditators, whatever that might mean, who valued houses that did not have radiating devices in them as the market for the houses, would putting a radiating device in that house lower its value?
Well, I don't believe it would, but I would indicate, I believe it was Ms. Town's testimony that many of the meditators seek out these houses, not all of them, and certainly many meditators live in houses that are not Vastu homes. So I just think there's an adequate pool of people that you would not have the issue that you're suggesting.
Well, the question is an adequate pool. The question is, does putting the meter in reduce the pool?
It may reduce the pool, but that does not mean it reduces the value. That's what I'm indicating.
Well, if the pool is reduced, doesn't that reduce the value intrinsically? Isn't that the whole point?
Asked and answered.
I believe it's a different question.
I'll allow him to answer it.
I think I already answered that. If there's still an adequate pool, then the value still can be recognized.
Anything else? No further questions.
Member Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Kronk. I just have one question. If a property has a monthly charge, does that change the value of that property?
I believe if that's in my opinion, if that's a voluntary charge, it would not change the value of that property.
Okay,
In other words, if they're choosing to accept that value, that charge, then no, it would not impact the value.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Lozier.
Thank you. You stated in your testimony that you've performed approximately 1,000 appraisals.
Yes, sir.
And how many of those were residential appraisals?
Probably less than 5%. Well, in terms of single-family homes,
Yes.
probably less than 5%.
So 50.
Probably.
And how many of those 50 appraisals of residential, single-family residential properties had smart meters in them?
Probably none.
You state in your testimony that if there is evidence that shows there are Vastu homes with smart meters, what's the source of that evidence?
Well, there was some previous testimony that indicated that. I believe
whom?
now. I don't recall whose testimony that was. Not today, but written testimony that I was provided. Somebody, I believe, with IPL.
And you conclude your testimony saying the installation of AMI technology may not be preferred by a segment of the market, but this is a relatively small characteristic that is not likely to deter a potential buyer or impact market value. You recall that testimony?
That's my opinion, yes.
Have you read any of the 600 or so complaints that have been filed in this case?
I have not.
Thank you.
Can we go back to Board Member Lozier's question for you on page 9 of 14 of your testimony, lines 10, 11, and 12? I'm also interested in the data provided by IPL indicates. What data, and if you don't know, I would like to know what data was provided that included the information on the Vastu homes and where that's at in our testimony. Do you know, Mr. Kronk?
I don't recall whose
Okay.
testimony it was, but I believe Mr. Callisto can probably point that out.
Your Honor, it was testimony of Randy Bauer, I believe, in rebuttal. I'm finding it right now. We provided that testimony to Mr.
You
Kronk.
can just, because I'll keep going and then we'll wait on that. Have you ever heard of NIMBY?
Yes,
Do you know what that stands for?
yes,
What is it?
not in my backyard.
Do you believe that there are instances where property is valued differently because of what is in a person's backyard?
Sure.
Do you believe that there is real estate that may have stigmas attached to it where the property would be valued less, such as next to a polluted lake.
I think that's probably true, yes.
What about gated communities? Higher or lower value?
Are gated communities, do they have higher or lower values?
Yes.
In general, I mean, there aren't a lot of gated communities in markets I've worked, but probably in general they're higher.
If you can, provide me with that.
Your Honor, it's in the rebuttal testimony of Randy Bauer, beginning on page 12, line 21, and continuing through essentially page 14, the bottom.
Mr. Callisto,
Yes.
do we have data request number 1.11?
I'm sure we can get it. For Mr. Littman or Ms. Matera?
Excuse me?
Do you know if it was issued to Mr. Lippman or Ms. Matera?
Mr. Lippman.
May I approach, Your Honor? I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. My apologies.
Mr. Callisto,
Yes.
do you have any further?
I'm sorry, no
report?
redirect.
Seeing nothing further, the witness may step down. Mr. Callisto, do we need to set up the webinar?
1 second, Your Honor.
Yes.
No, we'll waive cross on,
Mr. Schuling,
I have no cross.
Are we
we're talking about Miss Town. We'll waive cross on Miss Town.
So,
Mike, please.
yeah, first of all, I'm not sure of the procedure here, but if we don't want to accept the waiver, can we refuse that and have Ms. Town talk or not?
Well, you can, but here's what would happen. We would put her up on the stand. We would have you, we'd call her on the stand, right? And you would introduce her, we'd present her. There would be no questions from any of the parties.
That would be it.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess the question is, Mr. Turner, are you going to ask her any questions?
Just let me check. No.
But there is a stipulation, correct, for a change in testimony?
The one correction.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell what that is if I can you give me Town's testimony?
Say what?
Town's
Do
testimony.
you have Town's testimony? Is it in here?
It's not right up here.
Oh, right here.
This mine's not.
she's getting it.
Okay. You happen to have Town's testimony?
Mr. Kronk, I know you're relaxing. We are calling you back on the stand. So by the time the board gets done answering these questions, will you two have figured out what you want to do?
Yes, there's just,
Mr. Kronk, you realize that you are still sworn in?
Yes.
Mr. Board Member Wagner, you may proceed.
Kronk, I apologize for bringing you back up here, but
No problem.
one further question to come to mind. If there are two properties,
okay, yeah, I've got it.
both vast two homes, one has an option to opt out of an AMI meter, and the other home does not have that option and is required to have an AMI meter, which home do you perceive would have the higher value?
I don't believe there would be a difference. I don't think the market would recognize a difference in value as a result of the AMI technology.
Even if there was one that was required to have it and one had an opt-out and didn't have to have it?
That is my testimony. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
You may step down. Mr. Marcus?
Yes. Mr. Turner is not going to cross-examine, but we do have one correction to Ms. Town's testimony. That is a stipulation that can be changed, even though they're not calling the witness.
Would you, so that I have a better idea of what I'm agreeing to, tell me what that
Yeah.
change is?
Yes. On page 2 of her testimony, in lines 13 to 16, she states that on average, over a 12-month period, I would say that I discuss with or represent as a sales agent 7 or 8 buyers or sellers of these homes. Of course, there are more prospective buyers in the summer and less than in the winter. The change is that on average, over a 12-month period, I discuss with or represent as a sales agent 7 or 8 buyers or sellers per month of these homes. So it's not an annual number of 7 or 8, it's 7 or 8 per month.
I'm just going to repeat, then the only thing that's being added is we're adding per month into the testimony.
Correct. 7 or 8.
Sellers per month of these homes.
Right, correct.
Okay. Is there any other additions or corrections to the testimony?
No.
Is there any objection from any of the parties?
No objection from OCA.
Mr. Callisto?
No objection.
Mr. Turner?
No objection.
Hearing no objection, the testimony as amended is admitted. Mr. Marcus, are you going to let her know, or is somebody going to let her know? Okay, thank you. The board needs a 15-minute break. We will come back at about 4:25. Dr. Shi needs to be mic'd. Thank you. The Iowa Utilities Board is back in session. Dr. Shi, please raise your right arm. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate?
Yes, I do.
You may be seated. Mr. Schuling, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Please state your name
Larry Shi,
and by whom you are employed.
In general, is it fair to characterize that your testimony is regarding the ability to use analog meters for the non-standard metering alternative?
I'm sorry.
Is that better? Aware of Interstate Power and Light Company's waiver docket, which was docket WRU-2017-0004?
Yes, I work on that case.
And are you aware that IPL identified certain meter test slots that were failed meters?
Yes, I do.
And are you aware that when IPL identifies failed meter lots 2 times within 5 years that they are to replace those meter lots?
Yes, that's right. That's my understanding.
Is it your view that if there's a failed meter in a failed meter lot, that meter should be able to be used as a non-standard meter alternative?
You mean the one in the not failed lot?
In a failed, if a meter is in a failed meter lot, should it be able to be used for a
The
non-standard?
failed lot, if your company's position to replace all the meters, they should be replaced.
Can analog meters perform outages?
I think for the non-AMI digital meters, they will not detect outage too. I think for the purpose you select those alternatives.
At this point, I'm not concerned about the non-standard metering alternative. I want to discuss the distinction between AMI and analog meters. And my question is, can an analog meter detect outages?
No,
Can it detect hot sockets?
no,
Can it collect data on 60-minute intervals?
no,
Is outage detection a benefit to customers?
can you say it again?
Is the ability to detect outages a benefit to customers?
It is a benefit to customers.
Is the ability to detect hot sockets a benefit to customers?
It is.
Are you aware of the board ever directing a utility to utilize a specific meter type?
No.
I have no other questions.
Mr. Marcus? Can you turn your,
Just on that last question, you were asked whether you were aware of the board directing a utility company. Did you mean this board when you said no, or did you mean a board anywhere in the country?
Okay, I mean the Iowa Utility Board.
Board has
No,
never done it, to your knowledge.
Right.
When I was talking to Mr. Bauer and asking him questions, it was determined that of the 23,000 roughly meters that were tested, there were some 18,000 analogs and 5,000 roughly digitals. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And that is in Mr. Bauer's testimony. Now, when what was found was a 1.9% plus or minus 2% failure rate for the analogs and 0.14% failure rate for the digitals. Those meters were tested only once, correct? Do you recall whether that's the case or not?
I believe all the meters just test once.
Once in those. And so that wasn't done according to the statistical testing that says the entire lot can be thrown out if some meters fail statistically, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
That was a different testing scheme. That's all the questions I have.
Okay.
Mr. Turner?
We have no questions.
Board Member Lozier?
I have no questions.
I have no questions. Mr. Schuling?
I have two questions.
Go ahead.
I'm saying that, believing that I have only two questions. Dr. Sheen, Mr. Graveldinger was asking you questions about analog meters in failed meter lots and whether you were aware of that. And my understanding was your answer was yes. Were you also aware that there were analog meters in lots that didn't fail?
Yeah, that's right.
Another question that was asked was a comparison of analog meters with AMI meters. You're aware that the suggested alternative meter of IPL is a non-AMI digital meter.
That's right.
When he was comparing analog meters to AMI meters, wouldn't that same comparison apply to non-AMI digital meters and the fact that they wouldn't report the same instances of failure?
Yes, I think that's what I testified. If they gave the customer choice to select a non-AMI digital meter, they should allow the customer to use analog meters because they both perform the same functions.
No additional questions.
Dr. Shi, you may step down.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Callisto, you may call your next witness.
We're back on schedule, Your Honor, and IPL calls Dave Ogenson.
As he's getting mic'd up for the information of everyone here, it is my intent to go approximately an hour, hour and a half, depending on how things go. Or if I see that we need to break for the evening, I may make a decision otherwise.
Interrupt just a minute. As I had mentioned earlier, Dr. Shi is actually going out of the country tomorrow. Is he excused now by all the parties?
IPL has no objections.
Mr. Marcus?
No objection.
Dr. Shi is excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm multitasking right now. Please raise your right arm. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate?
I do.
You may be seated. You may proceed, Mr. Callisto.
Please state your name and spell your last name.
Yeah, my name is David Ogenson. Last name is spelled V as in Victor, O-G-N-S-E-N.
And Mr. Vogeson, did you cause to be filed in this case direct and rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any changes to make to that testimony?
Yes, I have two changes to make to my Appendix A. The first change is under professional experience. On the second paragraph under there, it should say electric and natural gas rate regulation. And then at the bottom of that page 22 of 24, I list the dockets that I've worked on. And the first one should be EEP 2018-0003.
And with that change, if you were asked those questions today in your direct and rebuttal testimony, would you give the same answers?
Yes.
Mr. Vogeson's available for cross.
Mr. Schuling?
Thank you. Mr. Vogeson, it's my understanding that your title is Lead Regulatory Affairs Consultant.
That is correct.
And have you played a role in the rollout of AMI meters?
My role was drafting the tariff that was filed back in February.
It's my understanding that in your testimony you discussed that IPL chooses meters as part of the process for providing safe and reliable service.
Yes.
And when IPL chose the analog meters that were in place prior to the deployment, was that part of the process of providing safe and reliable service?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And IPL has actually used analog meters for over 70 years?
I believe that was the testimony Mr. Bowers.
Are you aware of whether the IPL has analog meters that still have remaining useful life?
I believe there's still analog meters in service that are being replaced as part of the AMI project.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear all that.
I believe there are still analog meters in service that are being replaced as part of the AMI project.
Are you aware of whether there are analog meters that have been in place for less than 30 or 35 years?
I'm personally not aware of that.
Okay. Are you aware of the number of customers that are requesting alternative meters on the electric and gas side?
Yes, I have a general idea.
And it's approximately 2,800 total? Does that sound right?
I think that sounds about right.
Are you involved in the deployment of the smart meters?
No.
You testify that IPL has approximately 500,000 electric customers and 250,000 gas customers.
That'd be about right.
And you also testified that IPL would incur substantial additional costs if each of these customers requested and was provided facilities and services unique to each customer's desire?
That would be correct.
Are you aware of 500,000 electric customers and 250,000 gas customers requesting services unique to their desire?
Customers that do request facilities that are unique, and we do charge them for those facilities through our excess facilities provision or through a contribution aid in construction when they do request something unique or something non-standard.
But in this particular proceeding, where you're talking about 500,000 electric customers and 250,000 gas customers or 750,000 customers, we're only dealing with 2,800 people that have requested something unique?
That's the number that I understand they're on the opt-out list. So.
Is IPL charging a fee to customers for the installation of the smart meters?
No, they're not.
And the deployment that IPL is currently in on the smart meters required the replacement of all existing electric meters of IPL customers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If a customer had a working analog meter and maintained that analog meter, there would be no installation required or any cost, correct?
If we allowed them to keep the analog meter, I think we would still have additional costs associated with maintaining that customer's analog meter as far as, within the billing system, as I mentioned in my direct testimony.
Sure. My question was, there would be no installation cost, though?
No, I think installation costs, I believe, are capitalized along with the installation of the meter.
Sure. Still not answering my question. If you allowed a person to keep an analog meter that they already had in place, there would be no installation charge for a new meter, correct?
Right. If we allowed them to keep that analog meter, we would not charge them any installation costs.
Is IPL charging a fee to customers for the installation of a digital meter instead of a smart meter?
No.
Are you aware that IPL was proposing to revoke eligibility if a customer failed to meet the required meter reading 4-day window twice within a 12-month period?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Does IPL guarantee that every customer's meter is read within a 4-day window every month of a calendar year?
The 4-day window is related to the fact that we have a typical read cycle of approximately 30 days, and the 4-day gives us a cushion of that. We may read that meter anywhere from 25 days to 35 days.
That's not my question. My question is, does IPL guarantee that every customer's meter is going to be read within a 4-day window every month during a calendar year?
No.
And in fact, there's many instances where a customer's meter is not read and estimates are provided by IPL.
That's correct.
And this occurs many times on a monthly basis with IPL customers.
I have no idea how many times that occurs.
Would you agree that it regularly occurs?
Yeah, I guess I don't know how you would clarify regularly.
Sure.
I mean, I think it's an exception to the process because we intend to read the meters.
Can I pass out an exhibit? This one's not been admitted yet. This is one that's on the list as OCA Hearing Exhibit 115. Nobody has this one yet. Does this appear to be a supplemental response from Interstate Power and Light Company to the Office of Consumer Advocate and a data request number 4 for docket number FCU 2016-0011?
Yes, that's correct.
And the author of this one is Shirley Stibb. Are you familiar with Shirley Stibb? And in fact, she authored one of the other data requests that was entered into the record here in this proceeding.
Yes.
Is there any reason that you would have to believe that the information provided by IPL to OCA as part of FCU 2016-0011 and data request number 4 would be incorrect?
No, I have no reason about that.
I would move OCA here in Exhibit 115.
No objection.
No objection.
Seeing no objection, the hearing exhibit 115 is admitted.
Thank you. Mr. Vogensen, could you turn to page 2 of that exhibit? And there's a chart on that exhibit. Do you see the chart?
Yes.
Now, the months here, first I just want to do the months, and I realize these are back, but it's the data request that I had with the information. And the first month is April of 2015, and it goes to October of 2016. Is that correct?
What was that again?
Sure. I'm looking at the months, the time period that's covered. And on the very left-hand side, it says month, and the first one is April of 2015, the top month. Do you see that?
Oh, it's the numeric year, numeric month.
Correct.
Okay.
And the last one in that column is October of 2016.
Yes.
So it covers approximately 18 months, about a year and a half.
Yes.
And in column 4A, it lists total estimated bills with no read. And do the amounts in that column range from about $4,000 to $35,000 per month?
It appears it does, yes.
And the total for that 18-month period of estimated bills with no read is about $236,000.
Yes.
Do you know what the board's standard rule is on estimates that can be provided by IPL before they do an actual read?
Yeah, I believe the rule is a limitation of 3 estimated reads.
And after 3 estimated reads, there needs to be an actual read.
Yeah.
So potentially, under the board's rule, you could have 9 estimates a year.
Yes.
And are you familiar with budget billing?
Yes.
And I think it's also called level payment plan?
Level payment plan.
Level payment plan. And how does a budget billing or level payment plan work?
I think it looks at the customer's past historic usage, and it divides simply by 12 and calculates a monthly bill for the next 12 months with a reconciliation after 6 months.
It's an attempt to make a consistent payment over a 12-year period with a reconciliation to make sure the actual amount is paid or refunded.
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that one of the restrictions being proposed for a non-standard meter is that a customer cannot move their meter or have the same alternative type meter if they move to a new location in IPL's territory?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And why is it that if a customer has been allowed to have a non-standard meter, that if they move in IPL's territory, they can't have a non-standard meter at their next location?
And the charges that we have within the tariff do not reflect the costs associated with that move, because we'd have to go out, remove the meter from the former address, and then install a new meter at the address they're going to. So those costs have not been reflected. So we did not think that those, customer having to pay those costs would increase what the monthly charge is.
Do you understand that the customer originally wanted a non-AMI meter because they didn't want an AMI meter? Let me change it. That's not a good question. Could IPL come up with a reasonable charge for a replacement of the meter if a customer that currently has a non-standard meter moves to another location?
Yeah, and I actually addressed that in my rebuttal testimony on page 16, starting with line 15, going through page 17, line 5, using, the disconnect fee, the $56, a one-time fee, as a proxy for what that cost would be.
When was IPL's last electric rate case? Were you involved in that?
Yes, I was.
And when was that filed?
That was filed last year.
And last year being 2017.
2017.
And the order was actually issued in 2018?
Yes, February.
Did IPL raise any additional charges for non-standard meters or replacement of meters as part of that electric rate case?
No, it did not. It was based off a historic test year.
Has IPL indicated that they're going to have an electric rate case in early 2019?
I believe they have.
If IPL wants to have additional charges, it's possible for IPL to raise those charges as part of their 2019 rate case if they so choose.
Either through that or through a tariff filing or through an excess facilities charge.
Mr. Schuling, we are going to re-mic the witness as there are problems with it, both live streaming and in the boardroom.
Are you okay? Good. I can hear you. I'm going to turn to page 19 of your direct testimony. Line 11.
Yes.
On page 19, line 11, you indicate that the amount of meter reading expenses included in the electric rate case we were just talking about was approximately $8 million.
Yes.
And then on line 13, you mentioned that of that amount, approximately $6.4 million was allocated to the residential customer class.
Yes.
And I'm going to have you turn to page 20, line 1, just a minute. And you indicate that in the gas case that was just filed this year, IPL included approximately $3.2 million in meter reading expenses.
That's correct.
And then additionally, about $2.5 million of that was allocated to the residential customer class.
Yes.
Now, when you indicate meter reading expenses, that's meter reading expenses for every customer that IPL has.
And the testimony addresses the meter reading expenses for the residential class of customers, so for every residential customer.
Now, as a result of the deployment of AMI, some of those meter reading expenses are going away, correct? And in fact, a substantial amount of the labor costs associated with meter reading will go away.
Yes, that's the benefit of AMI.
Will IPL continue to collect those amounts from those rate cases until its next rate case?
From those rate cases.
Sure. We just talked about two rate cases, an electric one that was filed in 2017 and a gas one that was filed in 2018. And in those cases, IPL had meter reading expenses, correct? We just went through
Correct,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
The meter reading expenses will be reflected in current rates until a future rate case.
Now, in this particular case, IPL is then asking the board for additional meter reading expenses on top of the meter reading expenses that are already built into the rates. Is that correct?
No.
Is IPL asking for a $15 monthly charge both on the electric and the gas side for the
Yes.
people? Okay, and what's the purpose of that $15 charge on the gas and the electric side?
It's to reflect the incremental cost to provide this as an alternative option for customers.
Including meter reading expenses.
No, there's a credit for meter reading expenses.
There's a
Not
small
charge.
There's a small credit for meter reading expenses, but isn't there an additional amount that's being built in for a couple of employees that will go around the state and read the meters on a semi-annual basis?
The verification rates, but it's not the recurring meter reading charges that we have in existing base rates that they'll be receiving a credit for.
And I understand that there's a credit, and the credit, do you remember the amount of the credit?
Yeah, it's $1.33.
A month.
Yes.
That's correct. But there is going to be an additional charge that's included in the 15 for the additional personnel that's going to do the semi-annual meter reading of their meters for verification purposes.
That's correct.
And that's an additional charge for meter reading for customers that are already paying a meter reading charge in their rates, correct?
And that's why we're giving it a $1.33 credit.
Okay.
To have it balanced.
And who gets that $1.33 credit?
That's an offset to the meter reading, or to the $15 charge
For who?
for the customer that opts for the non-standard meter alternative.
So potentially of that $8 million and $3.5 million you're talking about, 2,800 customers are going to get $1 a month back for a meter reading reduction.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to turn to OCA hearing exhibit number 112. It's IPL data request number 21. There should be a group of our exhibits up there loose. That's it. And so if you could go to, it's up in the top corner, OCA hearing exhibit 112. It also says data request number 21, if that's easier to see.
Yes, I have it.
Okay. Now, in this, you answered this data request?
Yes, I did.
Now, in this data request, the question under A is, will customers with meters read by AMI devices receive any meter reading credits on their bill as well? So this is in relation to the fact that there's going to be a $1.33 credit per month for the 2,800 people that use alternative meters. The response says, once the AMI meters are operational, and it's my understanding they're all going to be operational by October, November of 2019.
Yeah, that'd be right.
Once AMI meters are operational, the benefits of AMI meters, such as reduced meter reading expenses, will also be reflected in rates. Is there something that's going to occur in 2019 that's going to reduce the rates as a result of the meter reading expenses going down?
Yeah, for example, when we file the rate case, we'll ask for the investment of the AMI meters And then associated with that then, we'll show the reduction in meter reading expenses, and that'll be reflected in rates for all customers.
Now, it's my understanding that most of the meters will not be operating at the time that the rate case is filed. But what you anticipate is that sometime next year, IPL is going to request a reduction in expenses for the meter readers and meter reading expenses that are no longer in existence.
Yes, as part of that rate case, to match with the additional investment associated with the AMI meters.
Will IPL at that time try to determine what the appropriate charges are for customers that use alternative AMI meters?
Yes, in the rate case, we will look at all of our charges.
And that rate case is going to be filed sometime early in 2019.
Assuming that, yes.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Marcus?
Going to take the lead on this.
Mr. Turner? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vogelson. My name is James Turner. I'm an attorney for intervener Kathy Matara, and intervening from a consumer point of view. And I would like to begin with a general question, and that is, what in your experience, how does IPL see the consumer as a part of the marketplace that it's serving?
Well, we see that we have this obligation to provide service to our customers, and that we need to provide that service at a reasonable price to reflect the costs to provide that service.
And you said in your testimony, I thought I heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but you said if we let them opt out, then we will do certain things. Is it in your mind this is something that you allow?
I guess, could you give me a quote to the particular provision of my testimony?
It was in your oral statement here this morning, or this afternoon.
Specifically, what could you ask the question?
Well, the question is, do you view the decision to allow consumers to opt out of the AMI program as something that you allow, or is it something that is allowed by the law, by government, by the board?
We filed a tariff to have that, the opt-out charge approved, but typically we use our excess facilities for a customer that requests something that's non-standard, but this is just to make it more transparent to all customers to what that charge would be.
And this particular proceeding is to examine what rights consumers are going to have in relation to this new technology, and what your responsibilities will be. That's what we're doing here today, right?
No, this proceeding is pertaining to the tariff that was filed last spring. To offer the non-standard metering alternative tariff.
And a part of that is the nature of that choice, that opt-out or that alternative choice. The consumers that we represent, or the consumers that I represent, would like and are asking for an analog opportunity. Is that something that IPL is offering?
No, we are offering a digital meter as the non-standard metering alternative in the tariff filing.
And this hearing is in part, at least, to determine whether you would be required to offer an analog as well. Is that correct?
It would be related to the provisions in that tariff.
And how would it be related?
As far as the tariff specifies, it's a digital meter.
And the effort here is, the effort that what we seek is to have that expanded to include an analog option. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Okay, now, much of what I would like to know you've already covered with the OCA Council, so I'm not going to ask a number of the same questions, but I do want to ask you about these charges, which you described in your testimony, and you also answered questions about here, if I can. This is in your testimony on page 15. That's the small graph. I just want to be sure that I understand. Could you explain to me what the $15.87 charge covers, what it's about? I understand the details here, but just generally, what?
It's the monthly charge, and it's all the incremental costs that we're going to incur simply to provide this alternative for customers.
Which alternative?
The non-standard metering alternative, which
is,
includes the digital meter, correct?
Which is there anything else besides the digital meter in that alternative? You said.
Well, there's the system enhancements we have to make, the verification reads. There's the meter reading credit that we previously discussed with the OCA.
If you were to add an analog option, how would that change the numbers in this graph?
I don't know. I haven't done those calculations.
Do you have any sense of that?
No, I do not.
Do you think it would increase them measurably?
I do not know.
And so that when one of the reasons for not offering the analog is the cost, that's one of the reasons that's been offered, but you don't know the costs of adding the analog.
No, I do not know that cost.
Is there any plans to figure that out?
I have not made any plans to make that calculation.
So you moving forward without having an analog option considered, without knowing the costs of that?
Right. This cost is based as how we filed the tariff. And the tariff include as the non-standard metering alternative, a digital meter.
Is the position of IPL unalterably opposed to an analog alternative?
Our position is that we think we put together a good proposal in our non-standard metering alternative. And that's what we included in our tariff.
And without figuring out what the cost would be for the analog alternative?
That's correct.
I want to go back to the first question because it's kind of the core of why we're here. And that is, what is your attitude or your orientation toward the consumer? You have a series of consumers, some number, some dispute about that number, but a couple of thousand at minimum, who are asking for something, and you're saying you won't give it to them. One of the reasons was cost, identified earlier, and yet you haven't figured out the cost. How does that fit into being sensitive to the consumer interest?
Well, I think one of the issues with it was offering multiple different types of alternatives as far as what the meter would be. And when we drafted the tariff, we took that into account that we wanted to only have one type of meter as that alternative, and that was the digital meter, which was our standard meter up until the AMI meter became our standard.
And what role did cost play in making that determination?
Well, by standardizing your cost, by standardizing what your offering is, you're able to offer something more efficiently at a lower cost.
But you just told me you didn't figure out the cost of
But
adding.
if you have multiple alternatives under an option for a customer, you're going to have incremental costs.
So do you have? Did you study that?
I may be allowed to answer the question before counsel asks another question.
I'm sorry.
When you start having multiple alternatives for an option, you're going to increase the cost of providing that option.
But I thought you said you hadn't looked into that question.
No. We haven't calculated the cost of the non-standard metering alternative with an analog meter.
And so how do you know that it's going to be more costly?
Because now you're offering another alternative under an option. Simply by offering a multitude of options, you're going to increase your costs.
Okay. Are you charging consumers for changing from the analog to the AMI program? Or do they get an extra charge for that?
No, there's no extra charge for that.
So what is happening to the old analog meters?
I think Mr. Bauer testified that earlier.
Do they continue to be valued by the company as an asset in the rate base?
Again, Mr. Bauer testified to what's happening with the meters that are removed from.
That's the physical happening.
Yes.
And I'm asking you about how's it counted for financially?
I mean, I assume that the asset would just be retired.
Have you looked into that, or do you know that?
No, I don't know that. But I think typically when something is taken out of service, it's retired.
Did you or IPL run a cost-benefit ratio on this program for consumers?
I believe Mr. Bauer has cost-benefit analysis on this.
Mr. Bauer has that?
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
No, I don't.
So you don't know whether this will be financially more beneficial or less beneficial to consumers?
I think that'd be a question for Mr. Bauer.
That's okay. So there is a sense among the consumers that we work with, they have a right to make choices about how their homes are dealt with. Is that something the company takes into account, the right to choice?
When customers request something from us that's not our standard offering, we provide that to them at an incremental cost. And that's why we have charge contributions to aid in constructions when a customer would like to have their meter moved to a different location on their house. That's why we charge an excess facilities charge when a customer requests to have three-phase service to their house when our standard offering is only to offer single-phase service. So if something is customer-driven, that's beyond our standard, the customer pays for that.
Is there a reason that can't be done with an analog meter?
Again, it goes back to the tariff that we've developed is based upon a digital meter as the standard, and that's been our standard, as Mr. Bauer testified.
My question is there any particular reason why you couldn't do the same approach for an analog meter option? That is, make an analog meter option and provide whatever the tariff would require to support that financially. Is there any reason you couldn't do that?
We haven't looked at that, no.
Got anything else? I do have a slightly different question, just very quickly, is what's the difference between the meters installed on a residence and those installed in businesses? How does that?
The businesses are going to be more complex. They might have CTs or PTs in order to measure the power. They might also need to record reactive demand as well as demand for the industrials and commercial customers.
Do you have any idea of the ratio of services provided to the businesses versus the residents?
Yeah, I think we have like 400,000 residential customers, probably a little less than 90,000 general service customers, and then we have approximately 3,000 large general service or very large industrial customers.
Do you know the percentage of electrical service that goes into each of those three categories from your total?
Electrical service
how much would
being
be
demand, energy sales, customer composition.
How much generally would be used by business versus how much generally is used by residents?
Again, do you mean demand or energy?
Demand.
I think that information we file annually with the Iowa Utilities Board in our load research report, and I think we just filed that either at the end of April or May. But we can provide that information to you if you'd like that.
I would be interested. Do you have a reason for not offering the analog alternative other than it's a third program and therefore it cuts into your efficiencies?
Pardon, I didn't hear all.
Do you have a reason for not offering the analog alternative beyond the notion that there would be a third program that you think intuitively would be too expensive?
Well, I think as Mr. Bauer testified this morning, we can't purchase those new anymore. So I would defer to Mr. Bauer what he mentioned this morning in his testimony as to why our preference is for a digital meter.
I just missed the middle of that. Did you say you couldn't purchase any more? What did you? I didn't.
I believe they said that we could not purchase any new.
Any new. So that if it was possible to purchase new meters, then you might consider the option of an analog meter more favorably.
Again, I would have to defer to Mr. Bauer.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Vogensen, there was, I believe, in questions from the OCA, Mr. Schuling, regarding a customer that's already had an AMI meter installed, that they're ineligible for the non-standard metering alternative. Are you aware of any customers that have had their meter switched that would like a different meter than an AMI meter?
I'm not aware, but I think there is another witness that is aware of that. That will be testifying.
Which witness would that be?
Angie.
Okay.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I was also planning to cross-examine. Do you want me to go after the board, or am I not permitted to
So
cross-examine?
that would be my fault, Mr. Marcus. I thought when Mr. Turner asked you if that was me reading things and I read them wrong, just give us a moment and we'll come back to you.
That's fine.
I hear you. Mr. Marcus, you may proceed.
Okay. Mr. Wagnersen, on the 4-day window that the customer has to read the meters, I didn't see documents that explained how he could get or she could get that information back to IPL. Is it email? Is it a postcard? Is it either?
I think they could either call it in or use an email to send those rates in.
So any of
Mr.
those,
Marcus?
I'm sorry. Any of those would work?
I think so.
Okay. And if a person doesn't have access to internet and he sends it in, do you have to receive it or does he just have to send it within the 4-day window?
Well, he would have to send it, that the read occurred within that 4-day window.
Yes.
Right.
But do you have to receive it within the 4-day window was my question. If he mails it on the 3rd day or the 4th day and it doesn't get to you till the 5th or 6th day, has he failed to comply with that condition?
I'd have to ask our customer service people that question, if that would create an issue for them.
Okay. And can he read it, when you say a 4-day window, can he read it 2 days before the scheduled date and send that information?
Yes.
Okay, so the window's on both sides. You testified in your direct testimony that, maybe you recall it, that you can't give, you're prohibited from giving estimated bills for more than 3 months. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. But you know that the administrative code provision on that says you can't give estimated bills for more than 3 months without the customer's consent, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's different from, I mean, you could, when the person signs up for a non-AMI meter, give him a document that says, and by the way, here's the rule, if you want to permit us to do estimated readings for more than 3 months, sign here, and he would then be permitting that, correct?
I think now you're looking at another exception to the process, and the existing process that we developed a charge on was based upon what was in the tariff. It wasn't based upon multiple estimated reads.
Well, I'm just talking about now the ability to readily get the customer to consent if he wants. I mean, I want a non-AMI meter, and I'd like to say, look, I'll give you a deposit, whatever you want. I just don't want to be defaulted. You can send me estimated bills for however many months. I don't care about the variation up and down. I want my AMI meter, non-AMI meter.
Well, I think we have seen issues with estimated bills, as the OCA outlined this morning, and I think that's one thing we want to avoid, is having a large number of estimated bills coming in high for customers, because then you have another customer satisfaction issue.
Well, but I'm telling you, for me, my satisfaction will be if I can keep my non-AMI meter, and all kinds of things may happen where I don't, get to send you the information on time. I'm out of town, or family business, things of that nature. For me, I don't care whether I have a bill that's 200% higher one month than it is the prior month. I just want to keep my meter. I'll even give you a deposit. Why can't that be done?
I think again, though, it's a standard process that we have to make available to all customers. You really don't want to start doing a bunch of one-off deals for individual customers, because then it gets administratively difficult to manage.
Well, you don't know yet that it's just one customer. Maybe a great many customers will agree that just as the board rule requires it, they would like it that you send estimated bills more often.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Yeah. But you know that from Mr. Schuling's document that IPL sends out a lot of estimated bills. They have in the past.
But that was with analog meters. With AMI, the estimated bills is going to go down, and that's one of the benefits of the AMI meters.
Okay. But of course, for some people, they don't see it as a benefit. They want to keep their meter, and they don't care about estimated bills.
But I think the customer that gets an estimated bill would see that as a benefit.
Mr. Schuling, I believe, asked you about moving to a new location, and the customer has a non-standard meter, and he wants to move to a different location, but he can't take his analog meter with him, or his digital meter with him. That's correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But what if the location that he moves to also has a non-standard meter? He still can't even keep that non-standard meter under your rules because it's a new customer of record, correct?
Well, in the new premise, there would have already been an AMI meter installed.
No, I'm saying...
When the former tenant at the new premise had moved out, they would install an AMI meter, because they would do a final read when the tenant moved out, and then the new tenant moved in and they'd install an AMI meter.
So anytime a customer moves, there's a AMI meter going in, and it doesn't matter that two of us in the Vastu area, I want to move and now rent or buy this person's house. There's no way I can do it and keep my analog, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But doesn't that interfere with normal commerce? I mean, people move all the time. Now you have set an impediment to a person doing what is perfectly normal, and that is moving to a new location and buying his friend's house, renting his friend's apartment. Just can't happen under your plan, correct?
I guess, was that a statement or a question?
Well, there was a correct, had a little question mark at the end of it. So it was a question.
Correct.
Okay. And let's suppose that I am a landlord of, have 10 rental units. First of all, can I, for those 10 residential rental units, get a non-standard meter?
If whoever is the customer of record wants it, yes.
Okay, and it doesn't matter that I'm an individual or own that 10-unit complex as a corporation. As long as it's a residential unit and I'm the customer of record, I can have a non-standard meter, correct?
Each tenant that's the customer of record can have a non-standard meter, yes.
Okay. I'm the landlord. And
The landlord is not the tenant, they're not the customer of record.
Well,
Whoever is responsible for paying the bill,
okay.
whoever that tenant is, that is who's paying the bill, who can set up the service, that's who's responsible for the bill.
Okay.
They can have the non-standard meter option.
Okay, but just to clarify, I'm not the tenant, but I am your customer, and I am a corporation. But I have these 10 residences, but it's okay for me as that landlord, being the customer of record, I'm going to pay the bills, I can get, for all those 10 apartments, I can get a non-standard meter.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when one of my tenants moves, though, and another comes in, because I'm still the customer of record, I can still continue to have the non-standard meter at that apartment complex.
There would not have been any change in the account.
Okay. Yeah, it just wasn't clear to me when I read the tariff. Thank you. The principal cost in the monthly charge for a non-standard meter is this customer service representative who's going to verify the meter readings twice a year, correct?
That's correct.
In the past, there used to be much cheaper personnel who were meter readers who read the meters, correct?
I believe that's correct, but I would have to verify that.
Well, you charged $133 a month for the meter readers, and that's the credit you're giving us, and that was the breakdown. And now it's $12.59 a month for not 12 months of meter readers getting out there, but 2 months of meter verifiers.
I thought your reference was to the hourly rate of a meter reader versus the customer service rep that went out there.
Yeah, that's the difference in what's going on. And I understand that you've said the customer representative has more responsibilities or whatever, correct?
I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, my question is that the overall charge for the meter reader used to be penciled out to $1.33 a month. That's why you're giving us the credit of $1.33 a month. Okay. But now, and that meter reader went out 12 months of the year to read the meters, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Now you have, instead of the meter reader, you have a customer service representative, and he doesn't go out 12 months, he goes out 2 months, correct?
Yes.
Okay. but there's about a $10 per month difference in the cost, and that is because if you go to Exhibit 8 of my binder, that Mr. Lippman asks that state all the reasons. If you see it in the second sentence in the interrogatory, state all the reasons why you need a customer field rep rather than a meter reader, and then the monthly cost IPL would charge to customers if the meter reader did the verification readings. But your answer is he's trained the customer service rep to not only read meters, but to perform disconnects, change failed meters, and to perform periodic meter changeouts. But previously, you had somebody doing that who wasn't the meter reader, correct?
Doing disconnects?
Yeah, disconnects and those other
Yes,
things.
yeah.
It takes only 2 weeks of training, he said that. And the training to do the disconnects and the reconnects and so forth, that's 2 weeks of training, correct?
I really can't comment on what the training would be for a field rep.
Okay, well, it may be in the record. Mr. Littman thinks Mr. Bauer said it was about 2 weeks. Do you know?
Mr. Marcus?
Yes.
I need you to, or either pull the mic back.
Sorry. And in that $12.59 charge, it's contemplated that the customer service rep has to do a lot of traveling, correct?
Yeah, correct, because, I mean, our service territory goes from Keokuk, Iowa, all the way up to Spirit Lake, and it goes from Dubuque to Creston, Iowa. So we have a pretty big spread across the state of Iowa.
Well, have you done an analysis of where the opt-out people are located?
We have some numbers of where, you know, some customers are coming from requesting the opt-out, right?
Well, but you did this tariff long before you had all these objections, especially from Fairfield, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you know that, I don't know what the numbers are right now, but if we have 1,800 people who have opted out all over the state so far, and you know, it looked like 800 or 900 are from Fairfield. There's a pretty heavy concentration in the Fairfield area, isn't that?
Mr. Marcus, just hold on a second.
Okay, sorry. I didn't hear it at all.
It would, For those of you that don't know, our energy efficient building shuts the windows and shades after 5:30 to keep the heat in or out, depending on the time of year. Anyway, you may proceed, Mr. Marcus.
So if there was a very substantial percentage of the people in that southeast Iowa area, Fairfield, Jefferson County, that area, that would greatly reduce those travel costs, correct?
Yeah, and as I testified, our purpose is only to collect the costs that they cause us to incur. So if you have a higher concentration of customers in a particular area, you know, that may offset, you know, customers that are more dispersed geographically. So we only want to recover whatever those actual costs are in the charge.
Well, are you going to, if it turns out that, you know, there is this heavy concentration, are you going to adjust the tariff to reflect that?
Yes, we can adjust it, like I mentioned earlier in my testimony to the OCA's questioning, that we can adjust it in the next rate case.
there's been a fair amount of talk about the standard, and you charge for anything that is non-standard,
Yes,
correct?
yes,
Anything a customer wants, and
yes.
Mr. Turner was trying to figure out whether the analogs itself could be deemed non-standard that you would charge for. I understand your answer. But obviously, it's in your interest to have a standard that includes only 1 meter, because everything else you're going to charge for, correct?
It's more efficient in delivering a service when you have standards that you follow.
Okay.
We have standards for how we build our distribution lines. We have standards for our services, how much service length we give a customer. We have standards throughout how we provide service.
But there are also lots of instances in society where a standard offers a multiplicity of choices. In this day and age, people are different. People speak up more for what they want than in an earlier age, and it's just a time where, there's a focus on diversity, and generally people think that's good. I'm just questioning why a standard has to be a standard of one standard, rather than a standard being AMI meters and a reasonable alternative. Why does the opt-out have to pay anything?
Well, for example, for decades, we've charged additional for a customer that wants a time of use meter.
Yeah.
Well, it's because the time of use meter was not our standard. So it's to reflect those incremental costs that you occur when you have to have something that's not available to, all 400,000 customers. You might only have a small percentage of customers that want it. So you incur an additional cost, and you want your prices to reflect the costs that you incur. So if you don't charge those customers that cost, everybody else has to pay. So it creates a subsidy that other customers have to pick up.
And the benefit is diversity, correct?
The benefit is to the customers that don't have to pay for it.
You understand that there are other utilities that do not charge for the opt-out.
I understand there's a variety of different things out there. I understand there's some customers or some utilities that do not even offer an opt-out for AMI meters. I understand there's some utilities that charge a one-time fee as well as a monthly charge.
So if you looked then at that whole ball of wax, all these utilities, you would say that, if there is a standard there, it's a standard that is very diverse. They do all kinds of different things, the utilities. But there are a good number that, Vermont, for example, by law, you cannot charge or you cannot refuse somebody an opt-out meter. But the states are different on this, correct?
Yeah, every state's different, and Iowa's unique from any other state as well.
Yeah. I don't have any other questions. I don't have any other questions.
I believe where we were, Mr. Vogensen, is in reference to customers who had received an AMI meter already but did not want one. You had said, and I believe your testimony says, they would not be able to be part of the non-standard metering alternatives. That's correct, right?
I think after we had sent the notice out to customers, that those customers that had AMI meter,
Okay. We're going to wait just a second on your mic.
Thanks.
Okay, so in those circumstances where someone has currently an AMI meter and would like to go to the non-standard alternative, at that point, then would IPL charge a one-time fee to change that meter back out?
I think if the reference is to the customer had not received the notice and then it was after the notice.
Well, I'm just, any customer who currently has an AMI meter but would then like to go to a non-standard alternative. I'm a little confused. At one point in your testimony, you say at that point they're not able to do the non-standard.
Right. Once we have an AMI meter and the customer was never on the opt-out list, then opt-out's not available to them.
Okay,
Right.
so I was confused because I thought a minute ago you just said
Right.
that you would open it. Okay. If you were required to allow that opt-out to those customers, would you then adjust your tariff to charge for a one-time change-out of that meter? Let's say if the board were to require that.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. In the proposed monthly charge, again, for the non-standard customers, it includes carrying costs for the meter, for the non-standard meter. Under IPL's proposal, customers would pay the standard customer charge plus the additional monthly charge. Is IPL essentially proposing that the non-standard customers pay the carrying costs on both of the meters?
They would pay for the AMI meter through their normal customer charge. And then the non-standard charge is the incremental carrying cost to have an additional inventory of those non-standard meters.
Okay, so it's an incremental carrying
That's
cost.
correct.
Okay. And in your rebuttal testimony, you argue that the non-standard charge should not be delayed until a future rate case because IPL's prices should reflect current costs. You then dispute OCA's contentions that the savings on meter reading costs should similarly be passed on to customers immediately rather than in a future rate case. How do you reconcile that apparent contradiction?
The savings from
Between, so in your rebuttal testimony, the charge should not be delayed until a future rate case, but the savings on meter reading costs should be passed on to customers. And you dispute the OCA who says those costs should be passed on. Yes,
correct,
yeah.
correct, yeah, because the savings from the meter reading costs need to match when we start recovering the investment with the AMI meters.
Okay. Would the monthly charge calculations that you've provided in your testimony change if there were no customer required reads?
Yes.
How would they change?
Depending on if there's no customer required reads, what's the alternative? You know, and we'd have to analyze what that alternative is and what the cost of that alternative is.
And assuming if they were more IPL reads, it would be a higher cost.
Right.
If it were no reads and it was just a once a year, then the cost would go down. Okay. How many employees does it currently take to read both gas and electric meters?
Boy, that'd be a question for Mr. Bauer.
Okay. And in the event that we don't want to call Mr. Bauer back up, perhaps another witness could be prepared to answer that. On page, and I don't think you need to go there. In your direct, I'll just generalize it. In your direct testimony, you state that if a customer has, I've asked that, never mind. So I think that, currently, how does IPL read combination customer meters for gas and electric? Do they send out one or two readers?
One reader.
Okay. So is there any reason that there couldn't be one reader for an opt-out customer?
Yes, there'd be one reader for an opt-out customer.
Okay. So you would only have to do one trip rather than two?
Right.
Is that reflected in the costs for a combination customer if both meters would be a $15 charge?
Again, we want the cost to reflect what those actual costs are. So if we have more combination customers, that would reduce those verification rates. So it would be a lower monthly opt-out cost then.
So currently, based on your tariff, though, if a customer is a gas and electric customer, they would have two $15 charges?
Yeah, they still have two $15 charges, even though the meters are read at the same time. It's no different than what we do today for a combination customer that we read their meter, if they're both gas and electric. And they both still pay the same, they both pay a customer charge.
Okay. And that's because it's difficult to distinguish between the two?
They're two
in
separate
a rate
utilities.
case? Okay.
It just reduces the overall meter reading costs.
So is that an area of efficiency that because of law and our rules that customers are paying in effect more than they need to be paying overall? And I'm not talking opt-out customers, I'm talking all customers.
I think they're not paying more overall. It's just that for some customers, the cost is less, and for some customers, the cost is more. So for example, you could have them reading combination customers, and you have a lower cost, but the same thing is if you have to go read a rural customer, you might have to drive a mile out. So it's really the combination across the broad spectrum of all our customers.
It averages out.
Yes.
Okay. At what point would the non-standard customers begin reading their meters on their own? At the time of installation?
No, it was once the provisioning is complete and we're ready to start billing the customer.
Would IPL be opposed to, for opt-out customers, providing estimated bills only throughout the year, understanding that I think board rules require at least one meter read per year or per calendar year or 12 months or some notion along those lines?
I mean, I think it could cause some issues, though. We've seen past issues with estimated bills. You have weather impacts like we've seen this last summer. You get issues between summer rates, winter rates, fluctuations in usage. You would introduce a variety of issues then.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that I have. Thank you.
Board Member Lozier?
Thank you. I want to go back to the discussion you had with Mr. Schuling and Mr. Marcus about the 4-day window, I guess, in general. And I want to understand, so if a customer's day to read the meter, say, is the 15th of the month, tell me what is the 4-day window?
4-day window would be to the 19th, or it'd be from, what is it, the 11th?
The 11th. So it's an 8-day window.
Right.
Okay. Now, the current rules of the Utilities Board provides that if a customer misses a meter reading 3 consecutive times, then a verified reading from the utility is required.
Yes.
Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
Okay. But what you propose to do is if a customer misses a reading twice in a 12-month period, then you will replace the analog or the non-standard meter with an AMI.
Yes, that's correct.
That's quite a change, isn't it?
Yes, that is different than the rule, yes.
There's been some talk about your budget billing, or I think you call it level payment
Level
billing.
payment plan, yes.
So instead of switching out the meter, you could have an option to move to the level payment billing, couldn't you?
Level payment billing being a substitute for reading the meter.
Yes.
But you got to remember then, you might have 12 months of prior actual historic usage.
Right.
But then if you move them to a level payment plan, after 12 months, you won't have what their actual usage was if you haven't been reading their meter.
But there's a true-up every year, right?
Right, but again, we have seasonal rates, you have fluctuations in weather, so they wouldn't get what their true bills had been throughout the year.
But your current tariff allows that.
Well, the budget billing actually looks at what they would have actually been billed, and it compares each month what they were actually billed versus what that level payment was, and then that's what the true-up is based off of.
After 12 months.
Yeah, and actually we do one after 6 months to see if there's a big variance going forward, so they don't have a big true-up after 12 months.
So who performs the meter reading after 6 months? The customer or the utility?
Under our level payment plan today?
Yeah.
Yeah, the utility does that.
Okay. So you have, in effect, you have 2 readings per year.
No, under the level, I thought you were discussing what our level payment plan is today.
I am.
We read the meter every month today. And with AMI, we'd still get reads every month.
Okay. You confused me. So with the level payment plan, you still read the meter every month. Is that what you said?
We currently read the meter every month, yes.
Okay. And that's done by the utility?
That's currently done by the utility.
Okay. And after 6 months, you do a true-up?
We do, well, we look to see if a true-up is needed, so they don't have a big true-up at the end of 12 months.
Well, as a general matter, your rates are cost-based, is that correct?
That's correct.
So in your chart on page 15 of your direct testimony showing the calculation of costs, you show the costs of $15.87 a month, right?
Yeah, that was close to the $15.
But your charge is $15.
$15, yes.
Who's going to pay the 87 cents?
Well, we had a range in our initial calculation, and it was a range of like a little under $15 to $16. So that's why we chose $15. It's kind of a reasonable approximation. And again, we want to reflect what those actual costs are. So in the next rate case, we'd reflect whatever those costs were as far as calculating this charge.
There's been discussion about the $12.59 charge for manual verification, and that's for 2 meter reads per year. Is that correct?
2 verification reads per year.
Okay. So by my math, that $12.59 a month is $151.08 a year. Sound right?
Yes.
For 2 reads. So each read is $75.54.
Yeah, and I actually had an exhibit attached to my tariff filing that had what that calculation was.
Okay. Well, is what I just said consistent with what your tariff filing it says?
Yes, I think we had a range. Yeah, we had a range of, well, we include the customer service costs as well as the vehicle expenses and loadings. So that was a range of $52 as an annual cost to $206. And that was in my attachment 2 that was filed on March 22nd in the tariff dockets.
Okay. And so you could contrast the $75.54 per meter reading to the $1.33 credit that you propose to provide for not having to do meter readings.
Correct.
How do you explain that disparity?
Well, when you have, when you look at how we calculated that charge, you have significant travel time to go out and read each one of these meters. For example, we're estimating a low of 1 hour per year up to a high of 1.5 hours per year. Whereas when you look at your normal or the current meter reading expenses today, they're just going house to house to house, so it's not an hour between each house when they go to read the meters.
And when they go house to house to house, what are they doing? Are they actually physically looking at a meter?
The meter readers, yes.
Okay. And
Yes,
are
and they have a
writing
handheld.
down the numbers on?
They have a handheld device that they enter the read into,
Is it
or they probe the meter.
Is it an electronic device?
Yes.
And is that data transmitted electronically back to the home office? Or is that device taken into the
I think
the home
it's
office?
taken into.
Okay. How long does it take to go from one house to another?
I really couldn't tell you. I could get that information for you, though. What the average, how many reads a meter reader makes in a day.
You also have a charge, or proposed charge for a disconnect of $26. Does that sound right?
Yeah, right. That's what our current is. Well, actually, that's a posting charge.
I'm sorry?
That's a posting charge. We charge the $26 prior to doing a disconnect. So it's like they go out and they hang a tag on the customer's door to let them know they're going to be disconnected prior to the actual disconnect occurring.
Okay. So if you did that twice a year, which I assume you don't, that'd be a charge of $52 or $4.33 a month compared to the $12.59 a month you charge for the meter verification.
Correct, and that charge was established in the 2002 rate case based off 2001 costs. So that charge, that $26 charge, has not been updated probably in 17 years for increasing cost to provide that service.
Well, as I understand it, the charge you propose is $26, isn't it?
That's what the current charge is in the tariff for the posting. We're not proposing a posting charge fee in the tariff.
See, right. So then you have a charge of $3.51 for manual inputs. Describe to me the process for how these manual inputs are made.
Well, they'd have to take the meter reading. I think we actually included some information on that in our tariff filing. So, yeah, the customer service rep, once the read is pulled, like a designated email box, they'll enter it into our CCMB, into the customer's CCMB account. They'll compare the read usage to the customer's usage history to recent months and the same time a year ago. The CSR will check use on bill, or if the bill is pending, and they will check the use on bill and generate the bill. and then the CSR reviews the account to see if we are approaching the 6th or 12th month to obtain the semi-annual verification rate.
And you calculate that that your staff can do one of these in 5 minutes
That's correct.
for 12 an hour.
Yes.
And you have a 21-cent charge to track customers. How much do you calculate that charge is for AMI meters?
That's solely to provide the functionality within our billing system to bill this new opt-out charge on customers' bills. So it's related to all the billing system enhancements that we would have to make, as well as to be able to support that going forward into the future.
We describe this as a new task, but I mean, isn't that what you currently do?
No, it's going to be a new charge on customers' bill.
Well, I know it's a new charge, but aren't you currently doing the same task?
No, because once the tariff is approved, then we have to do the development to put this charge into our billing system, so that it starts appearing on these customers' bills.
And you have a carrying cost of 90 cents, which you calculate to be 14% for depreciation, insurance, and cost of money. And how do you break that down among those three, if you know?
I can find that out for you, but I don't know right off the top of my head. Sorry.
Does the $1.33 a month for the meter reading credit, or what you say is the cost currently of going door to door, does that include a vehicle charge?
I'm not sure on that. It's just based on whatever is billed to a specific FERC account for meter reading expenses. So I don't know if that includes vehicle expenses or if that's just labor expenses.
Well, since you're doing one person to read both the electric and the gas meters, is it appropriate to charge $15 for each?
Yeah, because they're separate utility services.
Well, I understand that, but since you told me that you have cost-based rates, and it's a whole lot cheaper to read, the incremental cost to read two is less than one, right?
That's correct.
You're not doing that.
No, but I think when we look at those costs, they're spread across a broad spectrum of customers. So some customers are combination, some customers are not. But all electric customers are going to pay the same rate. Simply because they're a combination customer, it doesn't mean they get a discount on their rate that they pay us. It's the same that how we do a customer charge. So all our electric customers that are residential pay the same residential customer charge for electric service. It doesn't matter if they're a combination customer or if they're electric only. They all still pay that same customer charge. The same with our gas service.
Even though they're not necessarily based on the cost of serving that customer?
It's not that individual service or individual customer, but for that class of customers.
I think that's all I have. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
First, I'd like you to turn to page 5 of your rebuttal testimony. You were asked a question by Mr. Turner. He asked you, did you or IPL run a cost-benefit ratio on this program for customers? Your response was, that was in Mr. Bauer's testimony. On line 8, 9, and 10, what cost-benefit analysis is that related to?
I'm sorry, where have you? Where you at?
On your rebuttal
Oh, rebuttal.
testimony, page 5, lines 8, 9, and 10.
I assume that cost-benefit analysis would be, which would be reflected in a future rate case in support of our AMI investment.
Help me understand. When Mr. Turner asked the question, did you or IPL run a cost-benefit ratio on the program for customers, the response was it was in Mr. Bauer's testimony. Is this the same cost-benefit analysis?
No, I think he had done like a 15-year cost-benefit analysis. This is when we have a future rate case looking at the benefits and costs of the AMI infrastructure project.
And you believe that Mr. Bauer's testimony has information related to the cost-benefit analysis that Mr. Turner is trying to find in the testimony?
I think it's either that or it was in a data request that he provided.
Your Honor, I can clear this up. I believe it was not in Mr. Bauer's testimony, but it was provided as part of a data request. It's a largely public document with a number of redactions in it.
So will Mr. Turner be able to ask whom about that?
He's been provided that document when he was part of Mr.
Would
Marcus's.
Mr. Bauer, is that a confidential document?
It's confidential in part,
So
but
he
it's
would
largely
be able,
public.
he may be able to bring that up in the confidential session with Mr. Bauer,
Certainly.
correct? Okay. Thank you for Mr. Clisto. If IPL determines either in a rate case or in some other proceeding that the $15 is not correct, and it's an overpayment by the customers, will IPL be issuing a rebate or further charges depending on the case?
We would naturally reduce the charge, but I think it kind of depends on the timing as far as, the magnitude of what the overcharge would have been. There could have been an undercharge too, so, I think you need to look at both, if you're going to back bill them for the undercharge or refund them for the overcharge. You want to do whatever you do in parity.
And is there a reason that IPL did not do a cost-benefit analysis for analog meters?
I really don't know the answer to that.
Do you know who would be able to answer that question?
Again, I think it'd have to be Mr. Bauer.
He's the lucky one that gets to come back and answer that question then, right? Mr. Clisto.
Thank you. So, Mr. Vogensen, you had a couple of questions from Mr. Schuling when you started your examination. And he asked one question about an analog meter, saying that some analog meters have lasted for 70 years. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that you have coal plants that have been 70 years in age and still working?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you putting in new coal plants today?
No,
Why is that?
they're not cost effective.
I'm going to ask you to look at IPL Exhibit 115. Excuse me, OCA Exhibit 115. My apologies. And you recall getting a series of questions on this document from Mr. Schuling? Yes. This data request, which was issued on October 27th and responded to on, October 20th and responded to on October 27th. 2016 was in docket FCU-2016-0011. Do you know what that docket was about?
Yes, I think it was a complaint docket about high bill estimations.
And that was during the transition period for the customer care and billing system, or CCMB, that IPL implemented?
That's correct.
And is it safe to say there were a lot of customer complaints about issues associated with that billing transition?
Yes, that's correct.
Is it safe to say that the total estimated bills that were pointed out to you by Mr. Schuling was not desirable from IPL's perspective?
That's correct.
And why is that?
Because we prefer not to have to estimate a customer's bill.
And as a result of those complaints, this board opened up a docket to address, among other things, the issue of the estimated bills.
That's correct.
You had a question from Mr. Schuling, and I think a follow-up from Commissioner Wagner about the charges in 2019. That is, why couldn't you not wait until your next electric rate case to implement a charge for AMI? Do you remember those questions? Why is IPL asking for a $15 charge now instead of waiting?
It's to reflect those costs, to provide that incremental service to those customers, and to send those customers a correct pricing signal on what those costs are.
And IPL, as we heard when Mr. Schuling walked you through it, has money in rates, both electric and gas, right now to cover meter reading expenses. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is IPL still reading meters manually right now?
Yes.
And is IPL spending money on AMI technology, both capital and O&M, that it is not recovering on right now?
That's correct.
And is that money coming from shareholders?
Yes, that's correct.
Commissioner Wagner had a question for you. Strike that. Mr. Marcus had a question for you, a hypothetical, I believe, on what he described as his preference, which is estimated bills and a deposit to cover, presumably, his, if he missed a bill or something else. Why doesn't IPL offer each customer its own individual billing preference?
Well, it'd be administratively difficult and also be expensive to administer something like that for each individual customer.
Mr. Marcus had a question for you about why a customer cannot keep an analog meter when they move. And you gave some reasons for that.
Yes.
Is it also fair to say that a reason a customer cannot keep an analog meter if they move is because this is a limited offering by IPL, the NSMA?
Yes, that's correct.
Why is that, if you know?
I think it's to get everybody to move to an existing standard.
You had a question from Mr. Marcus, and I think also from Commissioner Lozier, concerning the facial disparity between the $1.33 credit that IPL is offering NSMA customers as a billing credit and the $12.59 per month that's being charged for billing expenses. Recall those questions?
Yes.
How many customers, strike that, over what size customer base approximately did you derive the $1.33 credit?
400,000 customers.
And over what size customer base did you derive the $12.59 cost?
It's approximately over 2,700 customers.
Is it safe to say that that has an appreciable impact on the difference in
Yes,
those two
it does.
costs? That is the difference in the customers that you're spreading the cost over?
Yes.
Is IPL making money off of the NSMA besides the small amount of carrying costs?
No.
One final question. Commissioner Lozier had a question for you on the number of days in the 4-day window. Just want to make sure that I understood what you said there, because I thought you said that was an 8-day window.
I think it was 4 days either side of the 30 days. The average read would be a 30-day.
Are you positive about that?
Let me check the tariff.
And you're checking the proposed tariff?
Yes. Yeah, for example, on tariff sheet 283, it says customers that elect a digital meter must self-read their meters and provide the monthly readings to the company within 4 days of the customer's scheduled meter reading date.
Okay. So was your intent in drafting that to make it 4 days on either side?
Right.
Learn something new every day. No further questions.
Board Member Wagner.
I apologize, Mr. Vogensen. I have one more question. Are there any costs today that IPL has to serve the customers who have requested to have an opt-out?
No, we're not incurring any costs other than tracking the customers that are requesting it.
Okay, thank you.
And how long are you continuing to run both systems? So there is no additional cost. What's that time period?
Yeah, I think it's kind of dependent on, when we get a ruling as far as the tariff.
But I thought there was built into the process a continuation of the reads for a while.
Oh, that, like Mr. Bauer testified
Yes.
earlier, during the provisioning process, I think he said it was like 60 days, where they continue to read.
All right.
And Your Honor, just one follow-up question to that, just to make one point clear. Is IPL,
I would appreciate a couple follow-up questions, too, if we're going to grant additional follow-up question.
I'll withdraw.
So the standard practice of the Iowa Utilities Board, as I was told prior to me being here, is they used to just continue to go around and around. And I stopped doing that to the most extent, except for the board members, because those rules don't apply with the board. Mr. Schuling, do you really have questions?
Questions?
So then it's my intent that this will be the first witness that will come back on in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything further to come before the board this evening? Mr. Callisto.
Just on scheduling, Your Honor, 2 points on scheduling. I've not yet asked Mr. Turner, but I do have Mr. Schuling's and Mr. Marcus's approval to release Mr. Kronk. I don't believe we have any need for him tomorrow. I've not had a chance to talk to Mr. Turner about that, but that would be our ask.
If there's no objection, the board will release Mr. Kronk from testifying tomorrow.
And
Do you
then
have anything further on scheduling?
One additional issue. At this point, we don't envision any cross-examination for Ms. Kelly. I don't know the other parties' views on that, but we offer that now to the extent that we don't have to bring her tomorrow.
OCA has no questions of that witness either.
Do you anticipate, Mr. Turner or Mr. Marcus, that you will, who's bringing, Mr. Marcus, you're bringing forward Ms. Kelly?
Correct.
Will you have any questions, Mr. Turner?
Yes, I will.
Your Honor, if I can be heard on that. So the board, when it opened up today, you went through the rules, the traditional rules on cross-examination. And I guess I'd ask for an offer of proof on what questions counsel may have for this witness, since until late last week, both attorneys represented both parties. It's tough to me imagine any scenario where counsel would have adverse questions for that witness. And so to honor the board's rules on allowing only for cross for things that were not otherwise filed in direct, of witnesses adverse to those that you're offering, I don't see how any questions he could have could be adverse to his cause.
Mr. Turner?
It well may be that some of the questions we ask won't be adverse, but there will be some adverse questions. They're basically clarifications.
Clarifications of the testimony?
Yes.
So the board is going to walk out in the hallway. Everyone else needs to stay where they're at so that you're here when we walk back in.
What do we want to answer? Where's the one filled out?
It's in this part. Determinant today.
I think it's right there. So did you find out when you were...
No, I didn't get a chance.
Well, just keep it for now, it's no problem. You should ask Jay also if he wants it.
Where'd he go? Did you take your mic off? Were you already gone when I said stay where you're at? So my ruling on, the ruling of the board on Emily Kelly is that she will testify. The ruling on the witnesses today, we're going to finish up tonight with this witness. So if you need a break, you need to take one. But we're going to keep going. So, did you have any further questions, Board Member Wagner? Mr. Schuling?
I have two questions. Mr. Callisto asked you, Mr. Vogensen, whether who is paying the cost of the implementation of the AMI at this point in time, and you said shareholders, but won't IPL come in a rate case and recover all costs related to that AMI rollout?
Yes, we'll recover the investment in a future rate case.
He was the other question that I have is a follow-up, but IPL will not give back or does not intend to give back any of the meter reading expenses that are currently being collected in rates that are not incurred by IPL as it goes forward with the deployment. For example, the labor costs that you don't incur that were granted in the last rate case, IPL has no intent to give those back to customers.
Correct.
No other questions?
Mr. Callisto?
Mr. Vogensen, to the extent that capital assets are depreciating right now that are in service, IPL will not be asking for recovery of those elements of the depreciation that's already happened. Is that right?
That's correct.
So those costs are effectively lost and
They're
not
lost
recoverable.
costs, yes.
Thank you.
Your
Board
Honor.
Member Wagner?
Mr. Ferguson, given the $12.59 of the monthly estimated per customer cost of the $15.87 calculated, the $12.59 is applicable to the verification of manual meter reading. Has IPL explored any potential cost-effective or more cost-effective options for meter reading verification?
Not at this point.
Do you have any potential ideas for cost-saving meter verification?
Not at this time, I know.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Callisto?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Is there any other questions directly related to this line of questioning?
Your Honor, yes, I haven't had a chance. I was going to follow up.
So,
Actually,
Mr. Marcus, you need to keep it specific to the line of questioning that we have and ask the question.
my line of questioning was dealing with Board Member Lozier's questions about the $15 charge for the gas and the electric dual customer. Is that permitted? Or?
You ask your question.
Okay. It is the case that somebody who is a dual customer, gas and electric, is going to be charged $15 a month for each of those meters, despite the fact that the $15 charge would be sufficient even if the $15 charge includes the meter verifier coming out, and he's going to read both meters. So even though the actual cost of that customer for the verification is less than if the customer service representative came out twice, he's going to pay as if he came out twice, correct? Just looking at I'm just looking at the cost for that customer.
What I'm telling you, though, is we're considering gas as a separate class of customers, electric as a separate class of customers. To the degree that you have overlap between those two classes, that would reduce costs for both the electric and the gas costs for that charge. And we only want to reflect those actual charges. Today, as far as our customer charge for gas and electric, we do read, we do have overlap that we'd read a combination customers, electric and gas meter at the same time. But that cost is spread across all customers within that class. So all customers within the residential electric class benefit, and all customers within the residential gas customers benefit from that.
Well, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of this particular customer.
So, Mr. Marcus, your question is?
My question is, this particular customer is being charged something unreasonably related to the actual costs to him. And you know that the statute, not just a regulation on this, prohibits you from charging unreasonable costs to any person, correct?
Correct, but again, we're charging all customers within that same class the same rate. And simply because you have lower costs for one customer, you might have higher costs from another customer. You might have an area where you have a higher concentration of customers, so that's less cost. Or you might have an area where there's a bigger dispersion of customers where there's a higher cost. So it's averaged across all customers within that class.
Okay. Could I follow up now on a question that Board Member Wagner, I believe,
What
asked?
is it related to?
No, I'm sorry. This was Board Member Lozier. There in the level billing plan, billing program, there is a read every month. You said there's a meter.
Currently, we read that meter every month. It's just that the customer pays a budget amount. I mean, I personally am on a budget account.
Okay.
And I pay the same amount, and it can be reconciled after 6 months if it sees that, I'm getting a big variance. But they still read my meter every month, and I see on my bill what my actual usage is. It's just that the payment that I make is levelized across for that time period.
But that customer doesn't pay for the monthly meter read, correct?
Yes, a budget plan. I still pay for a customer rep to read my meter. My meter is still read every month because I can actually see what my usage is every month, and the only way they can do that is to read my meter.
Well, you're not separately billed for a monthly meter charge, are you? You're just saying it's included in the overall rates that you pay.
It's included in the customer charge, but simply because I'm on a budget billing or a levelized payment plan, it doesn't change on what my actual bill was. It just changes on how I make my payments.
No further
Mr.
questions.
Callisto?
Nothing further.
Seeing nothing further to come before the Iowa Utilities Board, we are
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
recessing it.
Sorry, one scheduling issue.
Yes, sir.
When the board was on break, we spoke to Mr. Reed. He has a 2 p.m. flight tomorrow. If we follow the schedule as currently planned, we would take Ms. Layden Van Gundy first. We would ask that we take Mr. Reed first in the morning, just to ensure that he can catch his flight at 2 p.m.
The only thing about that is he would also have to be available for the confidential testimony.
I'll defer to the board on that. We'd be happy to take him confidentially.
Deferring to the board is to me, and if he needs to be available for the confidential session, are you asking that you would like me to reconsider doing confidential at the end of the day and instead have it prior to the...
I don't know the board's practice on that. Just as a suggestion, if there's a way to go into confidential just for Mr. Reed before he leaves, that would be ideal, of course. I don't know if that's possible.
What time is the flight?
2 p.m.
So the flight's at 2. He needs to leave here by...
12:45. Maybe a little later if he's a gambling man.
So the first witness on the stand in the morning will be Mr. Reed, and at that time we'll determine whether there's confidential information and at what point in time we'll go into closed session. If I go into closed session, I would like to try and address all parties that are in closed session. So that's what I'm going to be contemplating with Mr. Flickinger this evening. Is there any other questions or issues that any of the parties wish to bring before the board? It is our intent to recess. We will come back in at 8:30 a.m. You need to plan accordingly for lunch. It'll again be about It'll be at lunchtime, and it'll be between 11:30 and 12:30 that we'll break, and we will break for a full hour tomorrow. Seeing nothing further to come before the Iowa Utilities Board, we're recessed at 6:35.